Speaking of hoaxes, like the Siberia alien hoax and like the other recovered alien bodies have like been flooding the media for a long, long time. Is this just like a way to spread misinformation and kind of like spread propaganda, or do you think there's any truth to this, or do you think these people are just trying to like mess it up for the believers and sway the
Hmm.
opinions?
Well, I guess it's a matter of debate whether we're dealing with misinformation or disinformation. Is somebody deliberately confusing us, or is this just the way things are? I mean,
Mm,
social media itself is flooded with misinformation, and whether that's also, being influenced by foreign nationals in other countries to influence our political decisions and that type of thing. It's hard to say. Ufology is very, very ripe for this because there's no proof of anything, so one can posit virtually anything and make claims, and there's no way to prove it. That's why I tend to focus on actual proof, actual documents, the actual cases themselves. I do a lot of analyses on the reports, so what we can learn from the individuals, the witnesses who report UFOs and the types of data that we're getting.
mhm.
I think most scientists are wanting the data, and that's why I focus on the data, not so much the stories or claims, because those are completely unprovable. So I think there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there, especially with regard to UFOs, because it's an easy target.
For sure. Weather balloons, swamp gas, experimental aircraft, and satellites are often quickly used to debunk the phenomenon. Why is this?
Well, I'll quibble with your term. Um, Weather balloons, satellites, and aircraft aren't used to debunk UFO reports. They're used to explain UFO reports.
Hmm.
Most UFO organizations, such as MUFON, for example, trains field investigators to explain UFO reports. So finding out that a person who reports a long string of lights moving in the sky that they believe might be an alien armada, when it actually is a string of
Hmm.
Starlink satellites that have just been launched. That's not debunking, that's actual explaining, and that actually contributes to in a positive way because through the explanation of most UFO reports and sightings, we are left with the ones that are truly unexplainable. And to do that, you have to do some explaining. So, in order to make an omelet, you definitely need to break a few eggs.
Hmm. Is there any particular event that's like your favorite? Like perhaps like the Nimitz or the what's another good one? Like with the David Fravor,
Mhm.
that one. Is there any particular event that you hold like the Holy Grail? Or
Well, almost, I would say the Nimitz, Fleur, Go Fast, all those videos,
Mhm,
they're not really evidence because we don't have the full information, we don't have the data. David Fravor, of course, is a pilot who had some experience with regard to seeing some objects, and actually, you'd seen some on computer screens
mhm,
and talked to other pilots too. And there's a lot of pilots um, who have come forth and said that they've seen UFOs as well. In fact, long before Grush and Fravor had been on the scene, we've been receiving and working with pilots who had reported seeing UFOs all across the world, many in Canada, as a matter of fact. In fact, to this day, we continue to get reports through Transport Canada from pilots who had seen UFOs and reported them as UFOs to Transport Canada. So there are some interesting cases out there. I would charge that there's no real holy grail, but there are a number of cases that do lend themselves to advancing our mysteries a little bit more. There were cases such as Langenberg in 1974 when Edwin Fuhrer came upon some bowl-shaped objects in a field that took off and left behind swirl patches years before crop circles had been even imagined in the British countryside. In 1967, a fellow named Stefan Mihalik had been burned by all intents and purposes was a Hollywood-style flying saucer, and near the border of Manitoba and Ontario, and his burns were treated and examined by a number of doctors, including military doctors. There was radiation found at the site. It was investigated by um, RCMP, the Royal Canadian Air Force, and even the United States Air Force, all of whom could not come up with an explanation for what had happened. So I'd say there's a number of cases,
Hmm.
around the world. Certainly, I specialize in Canada, so those would be the ones I focus on. But in the United States, there were some interesting cases where, for example, in Texas, where two women and a young boy appear to have been burned by an object that was flying very close to them. It was investigated intensely. There's some debate as to whether it was some sort of secret device being carried by helicopter near them. But there we simply don't know. But the fact is that there are some interesting cases that do have physical evidence, and it's cases with physical evidence that we tend to focus on because those are the ones that we can say this definitely occurred, as opposed to, I heard secondhand from somebody who touched a piece of a flying saucer. That's not as useful in terms of science.
Hmm. Do you find that these key members who are trying to like Jeremy Corbell,
Grush, Knapp,
yeah, yeah,
etc. Yeah,
Knapp and
Coulthard.
Lazar, do you
And
think they're like Bob Lazar? Yeah.
well, he's not really in the same league as
Hmm.
Coulthard and Corbell and Knapp. Yeah, okay, but okay.
Do you find that these people are like, are they actively doing good for the community, or are they kind of just like playing the field and making the career out of it? Or do you think there's actually like are they beneficial to the ufology history?
I know that when pressed on this, a lot of fans of UFOs will say that the Rushes, Coulthard, Corbells, Naps are really good for the UFO community by putting the subject front and center, by making people think about it, that they're lobbying Congress in the United States, that they're asking the questions and so forth. But at the same time, they're making some really outrageous claims that don't seem to be supported.
Hmm.
That they claim to know where the pieces of UFO or intact UFOs are buried and where the bodies are held. They claim to know some great details, but the evidence so far has been rather lacking.
Hmm.
And as I mentioned, the contactee and abductee movements of the 60s, 50s, 60s, and into the 90s, um, they really tended to not really advance the subject very much. It was very popular and attracted a lot of attention. And I think, if anything, uh, the major proponents of ufology there in pop ufology right now, they certainly are, driving a lot of interest in the subject, and that may be good for causing some people who are on the periphery to take a more of an interest. It certainly has made some scientists take an interest because scientists themselves, have not been generally informed about the UFO subject. But now I'm finding that scientists are asking me, well, what do you think about the Nimitz videos and
Hmm.
that type of thing? And it helps us engage in conversation. So if that's the positive effect, I would say yes, there is some good to what's being done. But the claims themselves, I think, are not doing a lot of good at this point. I still want to know the details. I want to know the data, and let's see what's really going on.
Hmm. You mentioned earlier with your supervisor, like the stigma and like not taking it too seriously. Have you been on the receiving end of any like negative perception of like believing in UFOs? Has it affected your relationships, your career, and your lifestyle?
Actually, no. In fact, I
Okay.
would say the vast majority of media interviews that I've done have been all very positive because I'm not making claims. I'm,
Hmm.
in fact, with regard to the Canadian UFO survey, which comes out every year, the most recent one just came out a week or so ago. It's all data. This is the number of cases that have been reported. These are the colors that are most frequent, the provinces that have the most cases, that type of thing. And these are some of the reports that we've received. I'm not saying that the aliens are here and that there are bodies buried underneath Mount Royal. I'm saying that this is an interesting phenomenon that bears some investigation. And because of that, I've received a generally positive response. I even received an award from the University of Manitoba for my promotion of science and communication. So, I would say that in general, I've been received quite well, and I continue to be on the receiving end of requests for interviews, such as this one from Mohawk College, but also from other media. In fact, I was interviewed by CBC yesterday. So,
Hmm.
and it was a very, very good interview. So, in terms of stigma, I haven't faced it myself because I haven't been making statements that are absurd.
Hmm. Do you think like the pilots who are seeing these strange things in the skies and they're too scared to like come forward and because they may face some consequences for their job, do you think that's always going to be there? Or do you think there's going to be a time where we can bring forward this information and like represent the data and not have it like affect their careers? Or
Yeah, I think that pilots who are reticent about reporting their own experiences will be with us for some time.
Mhm.
Having said that, we have had pilot reports of UFOs dating back decades. In fact, I was just reviewing one from a test pilot, a Canadian test pilot who had seen an interesting UFO and reported it to National Research Council and National Defense back in the 60s, if I'm not mistaken. Very detailed report on record. And this is a test pilot who was, quite familiar with what's possible. And this thing was,
Mm.
flying higher than he could and faster than he could and so forth, which raises some interesting, security concerns. Um, so we've had reports from pilots all along. Having said that, there is still reluctance from pilots in general. Commercial pilots are encouraged to report. As a matter of fact, there is a directive um, that is sent out to all commercial and military pilots from Transport Canada, from the Government of Canada, and it's also an application to the United States to report unidentified flying objects. And they're actually called unidentified flying objects or UFOs, not UAP,
Mm.
um, in this directive. With the intent that perhaps there is some incursion into Canadian airspace, and these things occur all the time. In fact, the infamous Chinese spy balloon appears to have been observed over Canada months before it became to the fore in 2023. In fact, in 2022, there were reports from commercial pilots seeing basically a large balloon with instrument package underneath it over eastern Canada, and was reported as a UFO. So, we do get reports from pilots, and pilots, I think, have a responsibility to do that. I think a lot of the more sensational stories that are coming out, making the subject look a little silly and far-fetched, are going to make more pilots reluctant to report. As a matter of fact, the recent All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office report, which just came out recently, um, some of the individuals involved in pop ufology are saying this will actually cause pilots to not report UFOs because it came out and said that there are no such things as aliens, which is not what pilots necessarily would be reporting. They'll
Mm.
be reporting objects in the sky that they can't identify, which should be occurring regardless of whether there's aliens involved or
Yeah.
not. So I think the stigma is going to be with us in one form or another until we resolve that.